expert. All right. So let's get started here.
Yes. Sorry.
Right.
Side note.
No. People are not here to watch us we're not The View. People aren't here to watch us yammer.
I know.
Why not?
So question for you guys. Can you both briefly describe the struggles today's students face in terms of non-inclusive learning environments that meet the needs of all students?
So I can start. The struggles that they have. Well, first of all, it's they're being left out, which is the big part, and their unique needs and strengths, their strengths are not being taken advantage of. And what I see is when we fail to support learners inclusively, then by middle school and high school, they've checked out. And we have to break that cycle. And so that's why I'm so excited that you're handling this topic tonight of promoting inclusive strategies to reach all learners. Because as you'll see from one of my slides, inclusion is the fight against exclusion. And so, Kim, you
say that again. Say that again. For we have
I've got a slide. Shall I show the slide? We'll get to it.
Well, we'll get to it. But
Inclusion,
I like that.
The fight against exclusion.
That's good.
That's a really good quote. I like that. And yeah, I would echo what Karen just said. I think that there's a lot of barriers to the access, the equity, and the inclusion that is necessary to build learners who feel as they belong, that they have space in their learning setting, that they have space in their community, that they are part of the greater picture, and that their voice is one that matters and is heard. We just need to, do our best to use all resources available to ensure that this is possible. There are barriers that exist to that are, large scale and small scale, global, federal, local. But I think that there's so much room for doing better and seeing better things evolve for the learners we have with us today.
Okay, so quick question. Do you think, has the pandemic exacerbated this feeling of exclusion and this feeling like I'm not quite getting what I need? What are some, just off, what are you seeing in terms of real barriers that are exclusive?
Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
I was going to say, what I see in the classroom is evidence of missed opportunities for which the access road was not available for a very long stretch of time. And so while we're seeing progress, and especially now where we are in 2023, we see good things evolving. Mm-hmm. Some of the things we're seeing are on the expected trajectory, just maybe in a slower pace or coming to us at a timing that is a bit unexpected.
And I've seen a couple other things in addition to what Kim just talked about. One of them is some kids actually thrived in the online learning environment because for a variety of reasons. And some of them are now, they're in online schools or things like that. They thrived because depending on what their own skills are and their own strengths, and online learning really highlighted that for them. We're also seeing it did force teachers to use technology in ways they never had used before. And it kind of threw them right into the fire. And that was very difficult for many teachers. But the reality is that it opened up, again, like Kim said, it opened up opportunities. And so they could teach in a digitally accessible way. We saw more educators using Edpuzzle, for example, which is an excellent inclusive tool. And more educators using Seesaw, which is another great universally designed tool. So they were capturing the best features, but unfortunately, Kim, I don't know if you're seeing this too, but some of them are swinging back and they feel like, okay, we're done with screens and we want to go back to the traditional methods that we feel comfortable with, but have never really worked for kids.
Yeah,
So
I think there are challenges with striking the balance between sort of maybe we can call analog methods and approaches and the more digital or virtual side of things. And so I'm hoping that, like anything, the pendulum swings both directions, and somewhere in the middle we find what we really want to be with. And I think another piece to some of the swing that happens with the pendulum does have to do with funding. So while during pandemic, we all gained a great amount of access to wonderful tools, sustaining the ability to continue to subscribe on large scale can prove to be challenging. That said, I have a lot of faith in a bigger picture, a broader understanding and need for funding to support schools to be able to do that.
So we do have a chat question that we're going to drop because we want to get our audience's reaction, but we also turn to you as the experts. So I know Sarah's got a great question. She's holding on to you.
Yeah. So since we're here to talk about inclusive learning and differentiation, what do you see as the difference between differentiation and inclusion? And you guys feel free that are here, as Karen and Kim answer, feel free to answer that question from your teaching and your classroom experience in the chat too.
Yeah, because I think, some people think differentiation and inclusion are synonymous, but they are not.
not
Yeah.
typically, no. I mean, there's a lot of overlapping. One of the big differences that I think there is for inclusion versus differentiation is inclusion is proactive. Inclusion is intentional right from the start. So it's about creating an accessible, universally designed environment that accepts that there's learner variability and appreciates learner variability. Whereas differentiation, I think of it happening more after the fact and offering choices more for how to demonstrate learning. And so I think inclusion and universal design is more all-encompassing. And those are some of the things that I've noticed are the differences.
Okay, so I'm looking at the comments coming in. Natalie says that differentiation can be proactive, but is often reactive based on data. Is that your experience?
Yeah,
I think that's fair. Yes, because it's individualized design and delivery of instruction, and whatever materials are needed for the learning experience.
Okay. All right. Tris says, I've been an educator for 23 years, and I feel the difference for me is that everyone is included and appreciated for all they bring, traditions, culture, language, and differentiation is more tailor-made for the individual or groups of students. Oh, that's a good one too.
mm-hmm.
Oh, see, look at this. I was today years old when I learned that. Thanks, Tris. I appreciate that. All right. So let's get into the specifics now, because Kim, like you learned from the introduction, does speech pathology, and Karen has written this great book, which you all should get. It's called Inclusive Learning 365. It's got one strategy a day for inclusion. So it's a nice, helpful little guide. But, Kim, here's my question first to you. What role does climate, culture, and social communication play in the navigation of learning experiences? So, like, in other words, it's no longer about content. It's no longer solely about content delivery, is it?
Right. We teach students, not content, right? We teach students the content, but that is a social process. And as human beings in the school environment, we are sharing space 99% of the time, and we are needing to share that space with other people. And so having social communication competencies, having the knowledge of what it is to be part of a conversation as listener and contributor, perspective taker, empathizer, responder, problem solver, all of those skills are essential to creating a safe space with a climate and culture that allows for inclusion to be the tempo, for everyone to arrive as they are, who they are, and to share what they have to offer.
Okay, cool. Well, good. So what kinds, can you give us like sort of an example of the things that you recommend, the things that you do to create that more inclusive environment?
Sure. I spend a lot of time sort of unpacking the features of social communication and what it is to be a member of a social community of learning. I use a lot of different resources. I use a platform known as everydayspeech.com. It offers a wide variety of social communication curriculum and a whole scope and sequence of lessons in video modeling. They also offer a social emotional learning component as well.
Oh,
And so
good.
yeah, it's a wonderful tool. If anybody in the listening audience has not heard of it, I would definitely recommend looking into it. It provides very relatable, concrete, sequenced lessons to support learners who may need to see more specific examples and explicit opportunities for role play and practicing assimilations to use in their learning environment across the curriculum.
I just dropped the link. I just looked it up real
Thank
quickly,
you.
dropped the link for you.
Perfect. Yeah, so I use that, and we use the curriculum to teach things. We can't assume that students understand what it means to verbally or non-verbally drive or stop a conversation. We definitely can't assume that students come with a calibrated measuring cup to know how much is enough to speak and when is it someone else's turn, or to know how to navigate when a perspective difference arises or there's a
Right.
difference of opinion. So I use tools like Everyday Speech to unpack all of that and explicitly teach skills and strategies in ways that are hands-on and relevant, meaningful to the individual students. So that's one thing I use. Another tool that I really like to use a lot is called the Innovator's Compass. It's a wonderful tool. It has a variety of resources. If you go to innovatorscompass.org, you'll see that there's just an enormous number of examples.
Swetha just dropped the link. Thanks, Swetha.
Thank you. So what the Innovator's Compass is it's a set of 5 questions. And I like to use this when applying communication, collaboration, and compromise skills. When we're
Can you
faced
show us, can you show us the visual? Because I know you were showing that
Oh,
test
yes.
before.
Yes, I do have a visual. Let me share that.
Thank you.
This is the compass itself.
Okay.
And so you can see where it provides a structure for guiding thinking and communication. This is just one example of the compass. The compass also comes in a digital form that you can use collaboratively. People can be in different spaces and still access it. It's called iCompass.me. So when I use this with students, I really find it to be valuable because it brings thinking together, it brings communication together, and it keeps empathy and human-centeredness at the center. You'll notice that of the 5 questions, the first is who's involved. The people are at the heart center of the thinking of the compass. And if we're stuck, that's a really important thing for us to consider as we then consider the additional principles or questions that we would ask ourselves about. It brings us around to think about what our observations are, what's happening and why, how are we feeling about that? And we think about it in terms of the big picture as well as small picture, the past and the future. In terms of future, we're thinking about what matters most now and how will we get there? And it brings us around the top of the compass to what ideas might we have? What big ideas exist that we could potentially try to facilitate getting to what matters most and getting unstuck. Lastly, we arrive at the experiments question where it allows us to think about what small doable steps might we try, and there might be many steps along the way. With all of these questions, there's not just one right answer. The beautiful thing about the Innovator's Compass is that it is broad and it's welcoming and it brings all voices to the table to be a participant. So this is another tool that I use to help foster the application and the transfer of the skills that I look to try to encourage students to use as part of navigating their learning process.
So, okay, since I am a complete newbie to the Innovators Compass, okay, so can you sort of walk me through just like a brief example? So again, so how or how have you used this recently?
I use it all the time.
Okay,
I use
what's
it
your most recent
personally.
example?
I use it personally, and I use it with my students as well. You can use it from anything as simple as sort of like figuring out, what is dinner going to be tonight, to, I'm in school and I'm working in a partnership, a group project, and the deadline is in 3 days and we still haven't finished yet. So we can unpack that by thinking about, okay, who are the people involved? What's happening and why? We can zoom in on that, sort of like, what are the big things happening? What are the small things happening? Sometimes I turn this question around to what is not happening, because sometimes it's what's not happening that we need to see happening. And I like to invite students. We don't necessarily use the compass in this form. We sometimes make our own. There's sometimes a blank compass. And I encourage them to either on a Post-it note or on the whiteboard, jot down their thoughts. We come up and we collaborate, not just from our seats, but we get up and move around. We can add sketches to this. It doesn't need to all be text and written. We are very flexible with how we use the compass. And so in this particular example, we might then go to, well, what matters most? Well, completing the project. What ideas are there? Well, maybe we need to divide up the work. Maybe we need to discuss strength and challenge areas to make sure everyone takes on a role or a job that is best suited for them. Another idea might be check in with the teacher for support. And lastly, experiments would be maybe what I would consider sort of like nightly assignments. Like, today we're going to do this. Today you're going to do that. And then circling back. The other thing I really like about Innovators Compass, in addition to the fact that it pushes thinking and brings all voices to the table and can be used analog or digitally, is that it is a dynamic live document.
Okay,
We don't.
Wow. I'm sorry I interrupt, but I'm thinking like this is a simple tool. It's not digital. It's not, you don't need to know. It's almost like it's like a little compass just for life too. I mean, anything, like you said, big or small.
Yes, big
Oh,
or small, individual or group. It can be for yourself, your students, your school, your company. It's been used in many ways. And Ella Ben-Hur is the developer of Innovators Compass. She birthed this and has revised it, and she collaborates with people all over the world. And you'll see that she's referenced and given credit for that on this slide, as well as the website that is shared in the chat. And Ella is just so wonderful about her generosity with sharing this concept and all of the materials that she's created to go with it. They're all there. They're free for use for anyone who could find, them to benefit. The only thing she asks in return is to just communicate with her, share with her how it's helped, share with her the experiments that have been tried. There is a hashtag Innovators Compass. And so if people are inspired to check it out and use it, be sure to circle back to her so she can hear how it's touching your lives.
So, okay, I'm putting the hashtag in there, hashtag Innovators Compass, right? And that you can use that on social media and you'll find your other people who are trying it out and sharing their ideas.
Yes, and on the website, there are videos, there are a wide range of examples that I hope will bring inspiration to our listening audience.
Okay, so good. This is, thank you for this, because again, we're always thinking about what am I doing as a teacher? What's my instructional approach when this is just, I mean, I literally, thank you for explaining that, because it could be used for like any aspect of life. That's really great. Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome. We use it in ELA class. We'll use it to unpack literature, storylines, character analysis, talking about conflict resolution in stories. Absolutely. And you can use it for almost, some teachers like to use sort of change the end of the story as an assignment. Yeah. You can use the Innovators Compass to change many different parts of a story if you look through a certain lens, or you bring many different lenses to the discussion.
Thank you.
Very inclusive in its design and delivery.
Yeah, thank you
So-
for sharing that, because I feel like that, and again, in the chat, if you feel like that, we want to hear from you. I mean, it like how you might even now apply this even tomorrow with your students. So please go chat away. We want to see it. So speaking of strategies,
And speaking
one
of
good
this
one.
being an inclusive one, Karen, will you tell us about your book, Inclusive Learning 365, and how it helps teachers cultivate an inclusive mindset? I love the idea of like a daily
Yeah.
something strategy that I can use. Give me a checklist all day long. So tell us a little bit about those daily strategies that are included.
Oh, thanks,
it
Sarah.
is.
And Stephanie, I just want to clarify, I am not the author, I am a co-author.
Sorry,
There were 4 of us that worked together on this.
They're not
So,
watching. Shh. Your co-authors aren't watching. Shh. We'll give you credit.
but we love to share the mantra, the idea of inclusive mindset and adopting an inclusive mindset. And one of the things we hear a lot about growth mindset, fixed mindset, we
Mhm.
really believe that it's important for educators to adopt an inclusive mindset. And so this book was developed to really promote that whole concept of inclusive design. And the first chapter of the book, which is available for free, is available at the Amazon website, and that sets the tone for the whole book. It really
Yeah,
helps.
so if you
understand.
we're gonna drop that link in the chat. So that'll take you to Amazon and you can get a peek into the book. Yes.
Right. Yeah, and that's the first chapter. And we even say, don't skip this part, because it really is about setting the tone for how do you design? How do you think inclusively? And what needs to change? What are we thinking about it? And so that's a really important component. And Sarah, as you talked about, we give out little nuggets. So there's a different strategy for every day of the year. And there is, in fact, even a bonus strategy. There are actually 366 strategies in the book. And so it's divided up into different categories. And we've started off with cross curriculum, and then we have reading content and literacy, which is reading and writing. And then we have STEM, and we have professional development, research and study skills, executive function, social emotional learning. We have ed tech strategies for all of those at different areas. And so we know that there are certain ones that really will speak to people depending on what their perspective is and who their learners are. And again, we're going to be talking about a couple of those strategies as well that are highlighted in the book. One of them I can talk about right now. It's strategy 244. I really want to give a plug to Edpuzzle, because I think this is such an important strategy. Think about your learners who have, I mean, you probably, everybody, you have a learner or several learners who might have working memory issues. They can't hold on to that content. Video is a really important instructional tool when we are teaching, but some of our learners just can't hold on to that information. Edpuzzle is the perfect option, because what it does, it's such a great tool. I can't recommend it enough. Because the other thing too, not just working memory issues, processing speed issues too. And what's great about Edpuzzle, and if you're unfamiliar with it, you've got to run out and explore it further, because learners can pause when they need to. The educators input questions along the way, so they're not holding on to a whole long chunk of information. They're getting little bite-sized pieces so that they can really better understand it. And one of the things that Edpuzzle does is when the teacher inputs a question, they can review it. Learners can review it if they need to. And for the educator, one of the things in the teacher dashboard is you can see how many times your learners needed to watch a particular segment, or in fact, did they watch the whole video, which is really great information. I mean, it's that ability, or when we talked earlier about the obstacles, watching an entire video without that sensitivity for the learners who can't hold on to large chunks of information, that is an obstacle, and Edpuzzle addresses that challenge.
Well,
So
I think, yeah, I always liken it to, so whenever I'm doing a training, I go all Wayne's World. I'm like, everybody go doodly-doo, doodly-doo, everyone do the flashback, doodly-doo, doodly-doo. All right, my millennials might have to look that up. I don't know. But, we got to go back to that flag. And when the teacher, would pull out the VCR TV combo cart, a lot of us, I was always the one with the drool string on my desk because I would take a nap. So you don't really know that you're reaching everybody.
Yeah.
And being able for students to individually say, I need to pause, because you're right. If you're showing a whole class video, what kid is going to be like, oh, I need you to rewind in front of the whole bunch?
Exactly. Exactly. That's so true, Stephanie. And yeah, they're not going to say that. I can pull up my slides at this point too.
Please.
I have a couple slides I wanted to share. We did talk about how what is inclusion? What is inclusive design? The simplest definition, we got this from one of the webinars that we gave. It's the fight against exclusion. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking, when you're designing for your learners, think about who is left out by the instructional methods and the instructional tools that you are using, who's participating meaningfully, but also who is left out. And those are the learners that we really need to make sure that we are addressing their needs as well. And I work in special education, and my heart breaks for so often for those particular learners who I believe educators have the best of intentions, but they are not recognizing that their methods are excluding their learners, some of their learners. So the first step in designing inclusively is to believe that it can be done. So just if you've got that mindset of, oh, I'm not sure, you've got to believe it. You've got to own it. You've got to see that it's possible. And hopefully, even if you purchase this book, Inclusive Learning 365, it'll give you little nuggets of information that will make it easier for you. And it's strategy driven and not tool driven. So the strategy, there's 365 strategies. One of the things too that I just wanted to get people thinking about too. Oh, sorry.
No, please, absolutely share away. You could bring in more things if you want. Bring in your family. Talk about it. I don't care. This is it.
Well, bring in my family. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, my adult son is someone who absolutely struggled in school, and he graduated from high school and said, I will never read another book because he had a reading variability. It didn't mean that he couldn't learn. It just meant that the way that he was taught, some of those instructional methods just didn't work for him. So one of the things, part of developing an inclusive mindset and designing inclusively, one of the things we like people to think about is vocabulary matters, words matter. So can we reimagine what that looks like? So when we think instead of a teacher, could we talk about, we're all educators, anybody that works in the learning environment is an educator in some form. So can we broaden that word? Instead of student, again, we're all students. We're all here tonight. We're all different. We're all adults, but we are all learners. So it doesn't matter. Learning never stops. We want to model a love for lifelong learning. And those of you who work in special education, we know all about, on the IEPs, all about accommodations. Wouldn't it be awesome if we reach a point where accommodations are no longer needed, because everyone that is, we've designed inclusively so that no one is excluded and accommodations are no longer needed because the environment is set up to reach all. Another one, instead of saying the learner is able to, which is very passive, how about we say the learner can? Instead of saying, I mixed things up here.
That's
No, I'm sorry. No, learner first, not teacher directed. Oh,
Right.
I mixed that one up. So
Right.
not teacher directed, but learner first. That was a mistake. And unfortunately, I had this conversation twice in this past week with general educators where they said, oh, my kids can read. My kids have no problem writing. It's the other kids. So that whole, not my kids, your kids, they're all our kids. We're responsible for everyone. And so that was, I have to admit, was incredibly discouraging and distressing to hear general educators talking in that manner. So that's part of helping them develop an inclusive mindset to see all truly means all. And finally, we talk a lot about engagement. Engagement, does it really empower learners? What we want to do is we want to empower our learners for success and independence. And so engagement is one thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning anything or they feel empowered or they feel, any more independent. So that's another thing that we like to help promote. And the reality is, that's the reality. Shift happens. Are we ready for it?
Well,
I
I
love
have
that.
to tell you, I was a high school English teacher, and the thought of getting the 504s and the IEPs was really daunting to me. And I feel like your strategies, Kim and Karen, are like this little lifesaver because, right? I think you say to teachers, you've got to include everyone. Well, how do you include everyone when everyone's so different? And yet here you have both provided these really solid strategies that, and Karen, I think I love the word most. You keep saying nuggets. It's baby steps. This and that innovator's compass is a little baby step that you can implement. And these little daily strategies are just, it's not just to reach some kids. It really is to reach all of the kids. All of our kids, Karen, all of our kids.
Absolutely. See, it's that, see, you're adopting that vocabulary already. And so let's go out and change the world so that no one is left out. We don't want to exclude anyone. And Stephanie, we get it. Yes, it is challenging until you recognize I've got to design the environment right from the beginning, proactively, not reactively. And once you start doing it, I mean, it becomes so much easier when you make things available in a digital format. Because what kid ever said, give me more worksheets? Ever.
No child
Worksheet.
ever.
Yeah, no child ever.
There's a there. All right. Yeah.
There is a meme. Yeah.
Give me more worksheets, said no student ever.
Right.
Learner. Look, I'm learning. Oh, Karen, I'm dropping the vocabulary. Okay. So yeah. All right. So speaking, you had mentioned video. And with strategy 244, the ability to pause, to rewind, and Sarah pointed out, in case you might have missed it in the chat, Edpuzzle now, one of the new features that we launched in February is multiple attempts. I actually met a teacher at Spring Q who said that it was a lifesaver for her because she had kiddos who would just do it and didn't care what the grade they got. And now she says, guess what, my friend? You will keep doing this until you achieve like 80% mastery or 90% mastery. So that is giving them that multiple attempts to achieve mastery, not just a one and done.
And you know what's great about that too, that strategy, is that's called being mistake tolerant, which is another thing to consider when we use paper, for example, or just think about, this is another concept to consider. When you think about mistake tolerant tools, well, what does it mean? Think about molding with clay. And you make a mistake. What do? You mush it all together, you start all over again. That's mistake tolerant. But if you sculpt with stone and you make a mistake, well, eventually, if you make too many, you end up with a little pebble. So think about the tools that you're using. Are they mistake tolerant? And so adding in that new feature is really empowering for learners, because maybe I missed it wrong. I've got to go back and listen to it again. But the point is, you want them to learn it, to get excited about it, to be empowered.
Exactly. All right. Well, so we've talked about the video aspect for like the pausing. Sarah and I frequently do this when we're doing our trainings. We talk about the notes feature as well, that when you embed a note, you can use it for scaffolding. Like I always say, if you need any place you might pause a whole class video for students is a great place to add a note explaining a definition, introducing the characters in the play. What else, Sarah? I mean, links.
Yeah, I mean, I like to use it to link to a different activity or something like that. And I was also even thinking, like with Kim talking about the innovator's compass, like the notes or even multiple choice, like having, or the open-ended question, they could
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I froze, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's
I was thinking with the Innovators Compass, like you could have those open-ended questions, or like you could link to, let's say, like a Jamboard or a Google Drawing where students could fill out that Innovators Compass, like based on either the perspective that's shown in the video, like changing the perspective, maybe using like who could be the central person in the video, or how they would approach the problem that is presented in the video using the Innovators Compass. Like there's so many ways that you can use that note feature to link to an outside resource. That's like my favorite thing to do. Also, prior world history teacher, love putting a little political cartoon as my note that like is what we watched in the video to kind of like reinforce what we talked about in class and what the video showed, and kind of make those connections help my learners. Changing my language, help my learners kind of make that connection to what we discussed during class time. So, I mean, there's just so many ways that I could see this being used. And Karen, you were saying like being mistake tolerant with the multiple attempts. And another thing that I thought of that kind of blends that social emotional learning and all of those inclusive strategies is with that data view where you can see how many times a student rewatched a portion of the video. One of my favorite things is you can, like, I call it a deep dive into the data, because obviously you're looking at students individually versus, you know, just the quick glance of what grades our class has as a whole. But I love the idea of like being able to have a sit down meeting with that student and looking at how they're viewing the digital media. Like, what can I do to help you understand the video? Are the videos too long? Are my questions too close together? Like, what will help this one student do better in completing the Edpuzzles, and empower that student to be a better like video learner, consumer, if you will, of the video lesson. So I love kind of like that you even mentioned that you can see that far into the data is so important. And it's something that we really try to talk about when we do sessions on differentiation and inclusion, is kind of like, how can we really use those pieces to our advantage? So sorry, I kind of went on a tangent, but
Sarah will talk Edpuzzle all day.
I think it's important too to think about that the data informs the teacher, which in turn informs the learner to have a more metacognitive understanding of who they are as learners, that connects them and prepares them for empowerment.
Instead of just saying I'm bad at math, right?
Right. It doesn't have to be a categorical declaration, I'm bad at math. It can be, I can do math, but here are the parts where I get stuck.
Yeah.
And then we figure out how to get unstuck.
That is empowerment.
That is excellent, Kim. Yeah, that's great.
You guys act like you're experts or something. Also, speaking of video, so let's talk about another strategy from your book, Karen, please. It's strategy 316, because we're talking about academics, but we should also address social emotional learning. Thank you. Tongue tied. So let's talk about that strategy, which is building empathy through perspective taking, and how video could sort of help with that.
And I think this goes back to what Kim was talking about in the beginning too, about everyday speech and the strategies and the curriculum that's available and all those resources from everyday speech. But one of the things that makes it easy with Edpuzzle is you can drop in some real life scenarios and pause the video and embed questions, you could allow learners to respond to different things, to take perspective. It's all about perspective taking, and give them that opportunity to kind of reflect on what they're seeing, and then and it's part of the conversation and building, like Kim says too, and when you come back and you discuss it, you're building the metacognitive strategies, you're building awareness. And Edpuzzle makes that, and a lot of times we do this in a one-to-one or a small group setting, and learners feel really on the spot, whereas Edpuzzle allows them to work on it individually, and then they can get feedback from you in a very respectful way. And I think that's a really nice nice option and a really great strategy to build empathy, to build perspective taking, to build awareness of other points of view.
Well,
As a-
speaking of, yeah, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Kim, go ahead.
And I was just going to add to that, as an interventionist, for someone who delivers services to students developing their skills, I really love that entry point because it does establish a comfort level and an availability to work on some of the things that are hard. It also provides us a readiness for extending that learning in sort of the most comfortable, most individualized setting to the next place and the next place and across different environments. That's not to be rushed. That all takes time, and it needs to take on a pace that is appropriate for each individual learner. But we do need to start somewhere, and we need safe spaces to do that. So Edpuzzle does a really beautiful job supporting teachers to be able to provide that to their learners.
Thank you. We try. Speaking of, we like to provide those resources to be supportive so that you can empower your own students. So we do have a beautiful resource. It's just a simple spreadsheet, but it's CASEL aligned. And so we're going to drop, oh, Swathe already did it. She beat me to it. There's that link in the that Swathe just dropped. It's a nice spreadsheet, and we have videos that are CASEL aligned. So especially Unit 1, if you look under Unit 1, which is perspective taking and empathy, you're going to find a whole bunch of videos that you can use in your classroom with our students. So I hope that is helpful for you. So again, in another resource we wanted to provide for you with Edpuzzle, because again, once I started looking at the book, I was like, oh, here's an idea. Here's an idea. Here's an idea. So for inclusion, here, another option you might use, I found a great blog post from Edpuzzle about how to do read alouds with Edpuzzle. So again, tell me why a read aloud might, both of you could address that. Why might read alouds be very useful in an inclusive classroom?
Well, again, what the blog post makes these great points. One of the things too is, what if the learner in the back can't see the image that's being shared, from the book, the illustrations from the book? What if they wanted to hear, one of the things too is with the read aloud is the educator's authentic voice. They get excited. What if they want to go home and share that with their parents, or
Yeah.
they want to, even, how about if you had parents answering questions in the educator created Edpuzzle? I mean, so then that can be a family activity. I mean, there's just so much that's possible with the read alouds.
Yes, it supports students also who are continuing to learn their decoding skills and how to put together the phonemic and phonological awareness skills that it takes to actually read a book aloud. Hearing something read by another person, hearing pronunciation is all positive. It's all a cumulative process to literacy. And so it's very helpful. It supports not only the sort of the nuts and bolts of reading, but also the comprehension. And it can extend for the higher order thinking pieces as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I just said, yeah, thank you. And Sarah just pointed a whole point in there. I just realized we only have like 7 minutes left, and we haven't even gotten to any questions from the audience. And so, and I want people to be able to put their kids to bed and have dinner. So let's get right to the questions. If I think we're only going to be able to take 2 or 3, but if you've got a question, go ahead and type that bad boy in there, and Kim and Karen will be happy to answer that for you. And in the
Stephanie, can I just point out a comment that Sarah made? She says,
Yes.
I just love hearing Edpuzzle being called a safe space. Kim, that was great to call Edpuzzle a safe space.
Thank
Totally
you.
agree with that. Yeah, that's really great.
Such a foundation for creating an inclusive learning community and building learners up to feel that, to feel comfortable, to try new things and explore the challenges.
And
well,
I'd
and
like-
Emily, thank you. Thanks, Emily.
As-
Sorry.
like as a learner myself, you know, when I think about how I was in school and like we would do popcorn reading, you know, and I was like that kid that was like, oh, I don't want the longest paragraph. Oh, I got to look like I've got to skim ahead to make sure that I can pronounce all the words, like just such a high anxiety situation. So
Oh
to
my
me, when I kind of discovered Edpuzzle for my students and to help, because really our district went, you know, full on Edpuzzle during the pandemic, of course, as so many people did. But that was just kind of like the no fear factor, like you're saying, a safe space. But I love the idea as a person that always had high anxiety in the classroom with testing and whatever, you know, and I was always labeled as like a smart kid, but that's because I tested well, not because I, you know, wasn't anxious in school. Like, you know,
Yeah,
testing is completely different than how you feel while you're sitting in a
yeah,
classroom freaking out that you're going to be the next one to read, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. I will tell you
Um,
what, I just had PTSD when you said popcorn reading. Oh my God, I just had a flashback that just went, ooh, almost brought me to tears. Yeah.
yeah.
We do have a question from Sophia. Let's say the classroom in which some students cannot read at the same level as the other students. How would we include them and not make them feel like they are slowing down the class? I love using EdpuzzleLIVE for full class discussions, but I feel like some of my kids who are pushed in do not get the same learning as others. So that the read aloud, you don't need to do live mode with read aloud. You could send it up, you know, you could do stations, right? I would think you could do like a station rotation with read alouds. Or just push out as an in-class flip.
It
Those
could
are
also
my
be
ideas.
front loaded ahead of time as well to be previewed, and then it would be almost like a review.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point too.
And this is such an important question, and Sophia, thanks you for asking it, because yeah, there are learners in our classrooms who are reading at different levels. They might be decoding at one level, but comprehending at a different level. And we don't want to limit our learners to their independent level of decoding when their independent level of comprehension is much higher. So there are other options that we can use. There's text to speech. There's actively learn or insert learning, which is an opportunity to build comprehension skills. Actively learn and insert learning are very similar to Edpuzzle, except it's not video, it's text, it's articles. So you're embedding questions throughout. So there are ways that you can to promote an inclusively designed environment by using these other tools. And your strategy is to promote independent access to content, no matter the variability.